Hi, welcome back. I'm Christian, and this is the Rhythm and Reading series. Today I'm talking about two new elements of music. We have ties and dots. Now, ties and dots are a way for a composer to extend the duration of a beat, but they do it in two very different ways. So we'll start with ties first. A tie is it's kind of like a curved bracket, a curved line that connects two notes. I'll show you an example from page 42 in Joel Rothman's Teaching Rhythm. And what the tie does is it indicates to the player that you need to combine the duration of those two notes. You add the two notes together. So you play the first note and you hold it throughout the duration of the second note. And you can actually have multiple ties. You would just continue holding the note. Now it's important that you don't play the second note of the rhythm. You are literally just adding together the two rhythms. Ties are an element of music and not a type of rhythm because they can be added to any of the rhythms we've already learned. You could put ties on quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, half notes, whole notes. All you do is you add the rhythms together when they are tied. Now the next element of music is the dot. And the dot, like I said, also extends the beat, but it does it in a very specific way. It extends the rhythm by half of the value of the note it's attached to. And so, very simply, if you're playing half notes, the dot extends the rhythm by one quarter note. If you're playing quarter notes, it extends the rhythm by 1/8 note. If you're playing eighth notes, it extends the rhythm by a 16th note. So for me, this is a little bit easier to comprehend when I think of the table of time and how each level is on its own tier, like a pyramid. So if we start with the whole note, we split it into two half notes. The half notes split into quarter notes split into eighths split into 16th notes, and each of those is its own tier, like a pyramid. So when we have a dotted half note, like we do on page 45, we have one half note. The dot brings us onto the quarter note tier. It brings us onto this next level, and it says we have two quarter notes for the original half note, and then the dot means one more quarter note. So a dotted half note becomes worth 1, 2, 3 quarter notes. When we look at a quarter note with a dot, we do the same thing. The quarter note is worth 2 eighth notes. The dot extends it by one more eighth note. So we have 1, 2, 3 eighth notes. When we go to the eighth note level, we put a dot. We start working in 16th notes. So 1/8 note is worth 1, 2 16th notes. The dot means it's worth a third 16th note. 1, 2, 3 16th notes for a dotted eighth note. So again, the dot can be applied to any rhythm. A dotted whole note is worth 6 quarter note beats, for example. The dot can be applied in any way. You can mix dots and ties. And so these are just different ways to help us extend the beat. Now, there's also a double dot. And that one, I guess, is at least a little more confusing for me to explain. So in Joel Rothman's words, two dots placed after a note increases its duration by 3/4 of its value. Okay? So again, I like going back to the pyramid. Let's go back to our table of time. When we have a double dotted half note, like we do on page 49, what we do is we actually skip the level of quarter notes. We get into eighth notes. So we just forget quarter notes are there, and we can go into eighth notes. So one half note is worth 4 eighth notes. And we remember that from our eighth note lesson when we beamed 4 eighth notes together. We had that beaming to say, hey, this is 2 beats. So we have our half note, it's worth 2 beats. It's worth 2 beats, which would mean 4 eighth notes. Then we extend it by an additional 3/4. We add 3 more eighth notes to it. So a double dotted half note is worth 4 plus 3, 7 eighth notes. To me, that's a little confusing. The way I like to think of it is I have my half note, and I consider the first dot. The first dot brings me into quarter note realm, so I'd have 1, 2, 3 quarter notes. The second dot means to add 1 eighth note. So it's the same rhythm, but a double dotted half note in that system is worth 3 quarter notes plus 1 eighth note, or ultimately 7 eighth notes. When you see that rhythm, you would play like on the 1, and then you wouldn't play again until the and of 4, which is what that first measure tells us. Now the double dot also applies, well, it can apply to any rhythm, but a double dot on a quarter note starts you in the quarter note realm, but you finish in the 16th note realm. You skip that eighth note, that eighth note level. So, double dotted quarter note is the same as 7 16th notes. So you would play on the first beat, and then you wouldn't play until the of the second beat. There's 7 16th notes taken up. You can also think of it as 3 eighth notes plus 1 extra 16th note. So these are the ways it's built. The thing is, once you have that concept, you can start kind of simplifying it in your mind. I've never really had to think about double dotted notes before. I actually don't remember seeing them in music. Maybe it's been a long time, or maybe they're just not that common. But one of the things that I do to help me when I have a difficult rhythm to read is I do what I call doing the math of the measure. So, in all the previous lessons, I've mentioned that a measure has a specific amount of time that it takes, and that is dictated by the time signature. On page 50, I'm looking at the first measure of the summary, which is in 5/4. I know that I have 5 quarter notes in that measure. So when I see a double dotted half note, and let's imagine it's the first time I've seen one in many years, which it is, I might look at that and go, what am I supposed to do? Well, what I do is, like I said, I do the math of the measure. I add up the rhythms that I do understand. So the first rhythm I understand for sure is that I have a double dotted half note on beat 1. So I know that we're starting at the beginning of the measure. There's nothing before it. So we're starting at beat 1. Okay, so in my mind, I consider beat 1 is covered. Okay? Now I know there's dots and there's other things, so there's going to be other beats covered, but for now, I know beat 1 is covered. The thing that really stands out to me is, what do I do with this eighth note? Where do I put that eighth note? Right? Because that's the next rhythm. I want to make sure that I'm putting that eighth note in the right spot. So I skip the eighth note for now. And I say, okay, well, I have another quarter note. It's on beat 5. Because anywhere else, it wouldn't take up enough time, or it would take up too much time and go into the next measure. So I have a quarter note on beat 5. Beat 5 is taken care of. So beat 1 is gone, beat 5 is gone. That eighth note can be anywhere between beat 2 and beat 4. But where does it go? Well, now I know it's an eighth note, and I kind of work backwards. It's a single eighth note. There's nothing after it except the quarter note, and there's nothing before it. And the before it part is the trouble. How much space do I give this before I play again? Well, since it's an eighth note, it can go anywhere. But there's no other rhythm after it other than the quarter note. So if I give that eighth note its full value, it can only go on the and of 4. That's the only place it can go. If it were on the E of 4, I would need to have an extra 16th note after it to make up the time. If I put it on the of 4, it technically would overlap on the 5. It's too close to the 5. It wouldn't give 5 its total space. So it fits right on the and of 4. Now I'm able to do this very quickly when I'm sight reading. I see 5, I see the and, okay, that's going to be an and 5, and I already know beat 1 is covered. So there it is, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. So I'm able to do this fairly quickly, able to do this math, because I'm able to recognize how those rhythms interact and how much time they take. And that's one of the keys to learning to sight read quickly. The other thing is, I guess I'll look at the page higher up on that page. We'll see a lot of dotted eighths with 16ths. That's actually just a very common rhythm in itself. And so in the same way that you might piece together letters to make words, that rhythm to me now is a word. It's a very specific rhythm. And so I'm not concerned with counting the dots. What does this mean? That whole beat by itself has its own character, its own sound, and its own rhythm. So as you get used to these examples, you'll start to understand and recognize beats as whole units as opposed to having to break them up, which is immensely helpful once you start getting to sight read. So that's it for this whole lesson. Actually, it's not. In these pages, which start at page 42 and go through page 50. In these pages, Joel also introduces two new time signatures, 6/4 and 7/4. Again, we've talked about time signature a lot. The top number is how many beats there are in a measure. You count to 6, you count to 7. The bottom number, because it's a 4, tells us that it's quarter notes. 6 quarter notes and 7 quarter notes. That's it. So I believe in those exercises, if you're counting out loud, making sure you count for your full durations, you should have no problem. So that's it. Thank you for joining me. I wanted to recommend that you check out my website, christianjohnsondrums.com. What I've started doing is building separate articles for each one of these lessons. So if you go to an article, you'll see the video that I've posted. Underneath, I have the assignment from Joel Rothman's book. I have a link to the book, a link to the metronome if you need a metronome. That's at the top there. And then I have a text version of the lesson. And in there, I've worded things a little bit differently, try to make it a little more succinct and erase all the ums and uhs. And then also include examples from the video and examples from Joel Rothman's book so that it kind of reads a little bit more like a textbook, like a written lesson, and hopefully it makes a nice companion to the video. So you can watch the video, read the text, see the examples, hear the examples in the video, and get a full picture of what that specific rhythm lesson is about. So that's on my website. Please also remember to like and subscribe, ring the little bell so you get notifications when I post the videos. And I hope you join me for the next couple lessons. What I have planned is actually branch off a little bit. We've so far learned about what are known as duple rhythms. Duple is where we split our rhythm in half to make the smaller subdivisions. That's how we made 8th notes and 16th notes. What we're going to learn next is triplet rhythms, triplet-based rhythms, where we split our beats into threes. Okay, in a very similar way. So that becomes its own branch of rhythm. And the other branch is a concept called syncopation, which is in many ways a performance, I guess an element of music that's kind of like a performance thing, but it's actually written in a very specific way, and it definitely portrays a very specific feel. So triplets and syncopation, kind of two branches from where we are right now. I hope you join me for that. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.